Okay, namaste, everybody. This greeting of namaste, it recognizes the divinity inside of you and hopefully inside of me. And that divinity is the subject matter today. That is Atman that we are speaking of. So we are going to talk about Atman, Tat Tvam Asi, and what the practical consequences of these concepts are. But before I get to that, let me kind of review what we covered last time around, where the subject was Brahman. And we started by defining Brahman as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, meaning it is existence, consciousness, infinite. And we talked about these concepts and explained them in detail and saw what some of the consequences were. The two aspects of Brahman that are important today for this session, one is the fact that Brahman is homogeneous, right? Exactly the same all over the place. So it is not like Satyam is one substance, Jnanam is another substance, and Anantam is a third substance, and we are mixing them all together to create Brahman. That is not what it is. It's not like creating lemonade, for example, by mixing lemon juice and water and sugar and salt. So Brahman is completely homogeneous, exactly identical everywhere. That's one point that's important to us today. And the second is that Brahman is everywhere, all the time. Right? So those two things we will need as we get into the topic of Atman. That kind of reminds me of a story I heard a long time ago from a bhajan singer, a singer of devotional songs. And it went like this. Once upon a time, there was a beggar. And the beggar went to the temple and begged in front of the temple for many, many hours that day. And by evening, he had collected 20 rupees. So you can see that this is a fairly old story. And then on the way back to his hut, he decided that he would go to the local bar. And he went to the bar and he begged in front of the bar for an hour and collected 200 rupees, 10 times as much as he had collected all day long. As he went back to his hut, he said, Bhagwan, God, you are really something else. You give me one address and actually live somewhere else. So the point of that to me was that Brahman is everywhere. He's not concentrated in the temple or in the bar. It's exactly identical all over the place. So that's an important point to us today as we talk about Atman. We also covered the fact that we will, as this series, if it proceeds, we will cover several highways of Hinduism, and that include, apart from Brahman, they include Atman, Tat Tvam Asi, the causality, assumption, creation, human structure, reincarnation, karma philosophy, varna, sthita prajna, and karma yoga. So many different things that constitute important aspects of Hinduism. The other point that was covered was the approach that we want to take in terms of of understanding these concepts. And in particular, I did not want to take the neti approach. Not this, not this, not this. I would rather take the iti approach. And one could understand it this way. Let's suppose for a minute that you have a bad stomachache. And you go to your doctor and you say, hey, doc, I have this bad stomachache. I had a very late dinner and also had a few drinks last night. Could it be because of that? And the doctor says, neti, not that. Could it be a stomach ulcer then? I don't drink too much, maybe two, 3 drinks an evening, my job. Oh, doctor says, neti, not that. Could it be stomach cancer? I hope that's not the case. Doctor says, neti. If this doctor never comes around to saying iti, you're going to find a different doctor. So we want to go to this iti approach, recognizing that there is a great deal of danger in that. Because it means that the diagnosis that the doctor is making is 100% correct all the time. And that is very unlikely to happen. So as we move in this direction of iti approach, we are likely to make mistakes. And I think that is what one would hope, that the listeners are listening for those kinds of mistakes that might be occurring, and that they bring it up during the question and answer session that most of these talks typically follow. So we talked about that approach, and eventually I said that the approach that I want to take is something like the one that was taken by Euclid to his plane geometry, which is that we are going to start with an assumption. For example, last time around, we started with the assumption that Brahman is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. And then we basically follow through and try to understand what the consequences of that assumption are, right? So that's the approach we are going to take throughout for understanding these various subjects. Now, one other thing that I wanted to do and did a couple times was that to try and see if there are some other alternate thinking patterns that might be around, that people, if they are so interested, particularly if there are young people, bright young people who might listen to this one of these days, they might want to take up things like that. And I mentioned 2 things. One was the idea that there could be Brahma Sutras of science. Brahma Sutras are cryptic statements. And for each scientific discipline, one could think of coming up with these kinds of statements that describe the entire subject in a few lines. I rather suspect that that is not such an easy task to actually do, but might be something worth doing. The second was the idea that we define Brahman as ultimate existence, right? That is what is Satyam, and infinite consciousness, and that is what is Jnanam. So Brahman itself is intrinsically being defined as existence and consciousness. Instead, one could define Brahman as an alternate definition. I'm not saying that this is Hinduism as ordinarily practiced, but it could be defined not as existence and consciousness, but as the giver of existence and consciousness. There is a difference, right? One is consciousness itself, and the other is some mysterious X that gives consciousness to objects. If Brahman is defined in that fashion, what kind of changes will occur in Hindu philosophy? This idea is basically the same as the idea of Higgs boson, where Higgs boson is not mass per se, but is the giver of mass. It gives mass to elementary particles. So will the notion of Tat Tvam Asi continue if we redefined Brahman as the giver of consciousness and not as consciousness itself? So those were some of the topics we covered last time around. And this time, the topic is Atman and Tat Tvam Asi. And what are the practical implications of Brahman, Atman, and Tat Tvam Asi? All of these topics. What does it mean from a practical standpoint? And I also want to cover this subject from the viewpoint of three different things: Advaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, and science. So let's talk for a minute first in terms of the idea of ultimate reality. Ultimate reality, we will come back to this subject of ultimate reality later on in some other sessions. But for now, let's define ultimate reality as that which is the first cause of the universe. First cause of the universe. So if we ask the question, how many ultimate realities can there be? And what is their nature? How many ultimate realities can there be? Well, could there be zero ultimate realities? How about 1, 2, 3, infinity? In theory, the ultimate number of ultimate realities could be any number. Although I understand infinity is not a number, but you know what I mean. A very large number. And what might be their nature? Their nature might be matter. It might be consciousness. It might be combination of the two, or it could be something else. So those are the possible answers. Now, which answers are being proposed in Hinduism? If I look at Sankhya philosophy, one of the oldest philosophies of Hinduism, Sankhya philosophy is saying that there is one material ultimate reality called Prakriti. And there are infinite other realities called Purushas. So Sankhya is proposing altogether infinite ultimate realities, one material and a very large number, infinite Purushas, which are consciousnesses. The same consciousness, but different Purushas. So that was the original proposal. Then it must have occurred to people that there is no need for these infinite Purushas. They could all be combined together into a single concept called Brahman. So now we ended up with two ultimate realities, Prakriti, which is material in nature, and Brahman, whose nature is consciousness. And then it must have occurred to people that why propose two infinities? And Prakriti became Maya. I'm sorry, yes, Prakriti, which is the material cause, became Maya. And Maya became an aspect of Brahman. So we end up eventually, under Advaita Vedanta, a single ultimate reality called Brahman. So all the possible solutions, in a sense, have been used one time or another in terms of what the ultimate realities are. And there is yet another version called panpsychism. I'm not getting into that today. Panpsychism, which is saying that the nature of this ultimate reality is a combination of matter and consciousness. So if you look at the subject from that point of view, as to what the number of ultimate realities could be and what their nature could be, just about every idea is included in one version or the other of Hindu philosophy. So of these, I want to look at two ways. One is Advaita Vedanta, which has a single ultimate reality called Brahman. And this is today the most popular version of Vedanta being discussed. And the second is Dvaita Vedanta, which has two ultimate realities. One, Prakriti, you might think of it as primordial matter, and the other, Brahman. And then, of course, we also want to look at all of these subjects, whether it is the topic of Atman that we are discussing today, or the topic of reincarnation, which we might get into someday. We want to look at all of these from a scientific standpoint as best as we can. Right? So there are three ways of. So if the question comes up, what is Atman? There could well be three different answers to that one question, depending upon your point of view. Okay. So with that, let us move to the subject of Atman. And the topic of Tat Tvam Asi. I think this could be stated perhaps in just one sentence in this way, that Atman, we know that Brahman is everywhere. We also know that Brahman is homogeneous, as we have defined things. So obviously, Brahman is inside all of us at all times. So that Brahman that is inside all of us, we call Atman. Because it's our Brahman, right? We have this ego, so we are saying, this is, my Atman, and you have your Atman, and so forth. And since Brahman is homogeneous, it means that your Atman and my Atman and the universal Brahman They're all the same. That is Tat Tvam Asi. The equality, I mean, you could write it as an equation that says Atman equals Brahman. So, in general, I think one could think of this as simply as that. But we will look at it from a little more conventional standpoint. So, the first question is, what is Atman? And the way that it has been talked about quite often is this subject-object argument, as I would call it. So it goes something like this, very briefly. This laptop, I'm looking at this laptop in front of me. I am not this laptop. This laptop belongs to me, but I am not this laptop. So if somebody asks the question, who are you? I wouldn't respond by saying I am laptop. So laptop is an object being looked at by my eyes. My eyes are the subject who's looking at that object. Now, my mind knows that I have eyes. In a manner of speaking, it can see the eyes, so to speak. So my eyes are the object, and my mind is the subject. All thoughts I have, my mind can perceive it. So the thoughts are objects. Anything that we can think about, anything that we can perceive is an object. A subject can understand an object or hope to. An object can never understand a subject. Just as my mind can understand my body, but my body cannot understand my mind. So this is the typical subject-object argument. Now, what about awareness? We all know that we are aware. I am aware that I am speaking to you. I am aware of my surroundings. So awareness, is that an object or is that a subject? If I can understand it, or if I can perceive it, it is an object. So even our awareness, we are aware of our awareness, isn't it? We are aware of our awareness. So even that is an object. So the question is, what is the subject? Who is aware of all these things? And the answer that comes back from Hindu philosophers is that it is the consciousness, the chit, in Sat Chit Ananta, the chit consciousness, that is the subject. That is what makes the awareness of all objects possible, including awareness itself. So, and that consciousness is Atman. So that to me, is the typical subject-object argument that leads us back to the subject itself, which is consciousness within us, and that consciousness within us is what is being defined as Atman. Now, some people will argue that the words within us are somewhat inappropriate, and I am going to come to that in just a minute. But this gives us some idea as to what, generally speaking, this Atman is. And if it is this consciousness that is within us, then that consciousness is essentially Brahman. It is the consciousness implied by Chit in the Sat Chit Ananta definition of Brahman. And that is what we mean conventionally by Tat Tvam Asi, meaning that we are really the subject within us. We are a subject. And if you think of us that way, that subject within us is our Atman, which is consciousness. And that consciousness is identical to the universal consciousness, Chit. And so this little equation that says Atman is equal to Brahman is what is being referred to as Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. That meaning Brahman, thou meaning you. Right? Okay. So you can see that we have not made any significant additional assumptions. We have so far made only one assumption, which is that Brahman is Satyam Jnanam Ananta. And everything else that we have talked about, including the fact that Brahman is Anand or bliss, as we discussed last time, or the fact that Brahman cannot be cut, as we discussed last time, or this equality of Atman and Brahman, all of that are, in a manner of speaking, corollaries of the original Brahman assumption. So far we have a count of one as far as assumptions of Hinduism are concerned. And my current contention is that with less than half a dozen assumptions, we should be able to explain or think about all of the major highways of Hinduism. That it does not require a huge multiplicity of assumptions to explain what's going on. Right? So we only have made one assumption so far. Now, if this Atman is the Brahman within you, let's see what would be the answer to a question something like this. Now, I am currently in Dallas, but I spent a number of years, as many of you know, in Minneapolis, and hopefully will make a trip out there this summer. Now, when I come there, I would definitely bring my heart with me. I would also bring my brain with me. I don't think I'll bring my car. I'll probably fly. What about my Atman? Will I be able to bring my Atman with me or not? The answer is no. The answer is no. The answer is no because you can think of it this way. consider space, what we call space. And let's say I have a pot. So the pot has a pot space, right? The space within that pot. If I bring that pot with me to Minneapolis, what happened to that space within that pot? That space that was there back in Dallas within the pot was left in Dallas. Space does not move. The pot moves, the space doesn't. So it has a new space inside of it when it comes to Minneapolis. Now, it just so happens that the space is homogeneous. So the space that is inside in Minneapolis is identical to the space that was there in Dallas. But it isn't the same space. In the same fashion, the Atman that is inside of me in Dallas will not be moving with me to Minneapolis. But whichever Atman I have in Minneapolis would be identical to the Atman I had in Dallas. So, in a manner of speaking, if I were to occupy the space that you are occupying today, right now, I would have the Atman that you have. And this is the connection that we have, right? We all have the same Atman that is a part of the universal Brahman that is there. So in that sense, we are all connected. Now let's come back to the question of what is the definition of this Atman? I keep saying that the Atman that is within you, what exactly is this Atman as we look at it from the points of view of Advaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, and science? So, Advaita Vedanta first. Advaita Vedanta is saying that there is a single ultimate reality called Brahman. There isn't anything else other than Brahman. Advaita Vedanta is saying that what we see today as the universe, you and me and the trees and the rocks and everything else, what we see today as this multiplicity of objects is really Brahman, a misunderstanding of Brahman. Everything is Brahman. We misunderstand it to be humans and animals and the like. This is the idea made famous by this example of the rope and the snake, right? That point is that a rope is mistaken to be a snake in twilight. And we are afraid of it. We are afraid of that snake, which is in reality a rope. So that rope and snake example is a very good example to understand what Advaita Vedanta means by this. Everything is Brahman and is being mistaken to be this material universe. So under that scenario, and of course this mistake occurs because of a concept called Maya. And we will get into the subject of Prakriti and Maya, etc., a little bit later on in another session. But Maya is you might think of it as the universe generating power of Brahman. It's a power that basically fools all of us into thinking that we are all different and so on, when in reality, we are nothing but Brahman. That is Advaita Vedanta. That is the Advaita Vedanta interpretation. If that is so, then what do we mean by Atman? In that case, Atman literally means us as if the physical body that we have is nothing but Brahman. There is no such thing as a physical body in reality, according to this interpretation. So, to me, it seems that Advaita Vedanta would answer by saying that you are Brahman. All of it. You just don't know it, that's all. So that would be the Advaita Vedanta interpretation of what is Atman. Now, if I go to the Dvaita interpretation, Dvaita meaning two, right? Dvaita means two. Advaita means not two. Not two meaning that Brahman and matter and consciousness are not two. They are the one and the same. That's what Advaita means. That what we think of as matter is a mistake, right? It's an illusion of sorts, like the snake and the rope. That's Advaita. Dvaita Vedanta is saying that there are two ultimate realities, not just one. One is Brahman, but the other is Prakriti. Those are independent, coexisting ultimate realities. Prakriti is matter, Brahman is consciousness. Matter is not the same as consciousness. Therefore, two, Dvaita. Right? That's the difference between Advaita and Dvaita. So basically, what we are or what we see as this universe is a transformation of Prakriti. Prakriti is the material cause of the universe. And it is continually transforming into the changing universe that we understand today. So Dvaita Vedanta is saying that things are, your physical body is matter, is made of matter, a material substance, so to speak. And so, what about Brahman? Brahman continues to be everywhere. Brahman continues to be homogeneous. Brahman is inside of us. We are made, it's like there is the pot, which is like us, and then there is the space inside the pot, which is like the Brahman inside of us. So that's a little different interpretation of what is Atman. In that case, one could correctly use an English word saying that Atman is the Brahman inside us. That is the Dvaita interpretation of Atman. The Advaita interpretation would not say it in those words. It would say, we are Brahman. Everything is Brahman. Brahman is not inside anything. Everything is Brahman. So that's a That to me seems to be the difference between Advaita interpretation and Dvaita interpretation of Atman. What about science? Now, does science have an ultimate reality? By the way, I should have mentioned earlier that the number of ultimate realities could also be zero. Namely, there is no ultimate reality. And Jainism, for instance, which says that that this universe has always been there. There is no beginning for this universe. It didn't begin 13.8 billion years ago or anything like that. It was always there. And it is simply an oscillating universe. It expands and then it contracts and then it expands again and contracts again, and this keeps on going. And it has always gone on for infinite time and will always continue that way. Is there a ultimate reality in this case? Did universe get created out of something? No. So it seems to me that Jainism is saying that the number of ultimate realities is zero. Or what about science? If we go with the current idea of Big Bang, then one would say something like there was a beginning. There was something from which this universe started. We will come back to this question in more details when we look at the subject of creation. But there was something from which this universe started, and the current one of the current hypotheses is that the universe started out of a zero energy state. But be that as it may, I don't want to take us in that direction today. It started from something. So that something, whatever it was, is the ultimate reality, the way we have defined it for now, which is what created this universe. Where did this universe come from? And so that is a single ultimate reality. So in a manner of speaking, science is Advaita. But instead of postulating the nature of that ultimate reality to be consciousness, as Advaita Vedanta does, it is postulating the nature of that ultimate reality to be matter. So one could, in theory, say that science is Advaita Vedanta, not Vedanta, Advaita science, where the ultimate reality is material in nature. And so now the question becomes, where did this consciousness come from? And science is today saying, although there are differing views, today saying that consciousness is essentially the result of evolutionary biology. That it is not something unique and different and so forth, but it's just evolution that created consciousness. Although nobody really knows how it all happened, but that's the general thought process. And if that were the case, what would be Atman from a scientific standpoint? Atman would be that, whatever that mechanism is, that creates this consciousness. because we are basically saying that consciousness is Brahman, Atman, right? So depending upon the point of view you take, whether you believe or you want to look at it from an Advaita Vedanta point of view, or Dvaita Vedanta point of view, or scientific point of view, or panpsychism viewpoint, what Atman is very similar but yet different, slightly different interpretations of what Atman is. And so Tat Tvam Asi seems obvious that this Atman, which is consciousness, is the same as the universal consciousness that was within us. And that's what the equation Atman equals Brahman says. And that is the the standard interpretation of Hinduism. I can see that I'm running out of time. I'm going to have to skip over several things here. And so I'll just tell you what I'm skipping over. I'm skipping over this basic idea that Advaita means not two. Not two. If I ask you the question, pick a number that is not two, what would be the answer? If I say pick a non-negative number that is not two, well, any number that is except two. So it could be 0, it could be 1, it could be 3, 4, 5, infinity. So what does not two actually mean? We take it to mean one, right? That's what Atman equal to Brahman says. That Atman and Brahman are one. But not two need not be just one. It could be any number that is not two. So if you look at that subject, and I don't have time today to do it, but if you look at it from that point of view, you come to a slightly different understanding of what Atman and Brahman are. The understanding is not that Atman is equal to Brahman. Someday, if we have time, more time, we'll get into it. Let me come to, in a few minutes, let me come to what is the practical significance of these ideas. Right? And I'll be brief. One is that science cannot prove or disprove Brahman. So if anybody thought that by looking at physics or by looking at it from a standard scientific point of view, we would eventually be able to figure out what Brahman is and so on, the answer is no. That is not going to happen. Okay. And then people might respond by saying that Einstein, for example, once said after he figured out general theory of relativity, that he had a glimpse of the mind of God, as he put it. That he had understood a little bit of what God was thinking about. Right? That's a well-known Einstein statement. But that all looks great as long as one realizes that the God of Einstein was not Brahman. The God of Einstein was Spinoza's God, Spinoza the philosopher, and Spinoza's God was this universe. So the God that Einstein was talking about was nothing other than the universe itself. and not Brahman. So understanding anything about the universe is clearly getting, if you define universe as the God, then the statements follows through that he understood part of the mind of God. Right? But science will not be able to prove or disprove Brahman. That's one thing. Second, it has said that nothing can happen without Brahman. Nothing can happen without Brahman, but Brahman takes no responsibility for anything that happens. You think about that statement. Nothing happens without Brahman, but Brahman takes no responsibility for all the bad stuff that is happening on this earth or the good things that are happening on this earth. Brahman takes no responsibility for it, but none of them would have happened without him. Right? And that also is true. And one could understand it quickly this way. Think of the gas in your car, in gas in the gas tank. Right? Think of that gas as Brahman. Now, the gas brings the car to life. No gas in the tank, the car cannot do anything. So nothing happens without the gas, right? Nothing happens. The car cannot move without the gas. Now, if you drive the car into a ditch, could it have happened without the gas? No, it couldn't have. And yet, is that the responsibility of the gas? No, it is not. So nothing could have happened without the gas. No bad stuff. But the gas is not responsible for anything that happens. In a similar way, if you were to win Daytona 500, that also could not have happened without the gas. And yet gas takes no credit for what happened. Brahman is like the gas in your car. Right? So that's a practical consequence. What does that mean? That means that the old saying, God helps those who help themselves, is the truth. Right? That's what that means. To me, after thinking about all of this for some time, from a practical standpoint, what I thought was very well done was this one paragraph from Vivekananda. There are many sayings of Vivekananda. You can find them easily if you search for it. But for me, this particular saying is, I think, fantastic. Every word in this paragraph seems to have been so meticulously chosen. So let me read that for you. Here is what he says. He says, each soul is potentially divine. We've got to be very careful understanding this. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal in this life, the goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Let me read the whole paragraph and then we'll come back and talk about it a bit. Do this with Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raj Yoga, or Jnana Yoga. By one or all, and be free. By free, he obviously means free of suffering. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines, dogmas, rituals, books, temples, forms are secondary details. Not that they are useless, they are useful, but they are secondary. What is primary? Exhibit the divinity within you. That is the primary goal, right? So let's come back and look at a couple of these sentences. Each soul is potentially divine. He didn't say you are divine, right? He didn't say that. He said each soul. Well, first of all, what is a soul? So a soul, and we will come to this in greater details when we talk about the structure of a human being. What is a human being? How is it? What's the composition according to Hinduism? So we'll look into this question of what is a soul. But it is essentially a soul being, essentially what I would call conditioned consciousness. So consciousness is Atman, right? Chit. Conditioned consciousness means consciousness that is limited by our body, mind, and intellect and vasanas. That limited consciousness is soul. And that is why, so soul is not pure consciousness, right? It's kind of like saying that if I say that continuing on with my gas analogy, that the gas might be in your lawnmower. So the gas can do many things, but because it is sitting inside a lawnmower, it can only travel at 2 miles an hour because that lawnmower doesn't go any much faster than that. If that same gas were inside a car, it could have gone at 100 miles an hour. Same gas. If it is in a plane, it could fly. So what that gas can do is limited by its surroundings, what it is in. That is conditioning. Conditioning means limiting. In the same way, Atman may be capable of all kinds of things, but it is kind of stuck inside of that environment, right? A rock, for example, also has an Atman. Remember, Brahman is everywhere. It's inside a rock as well. It doesn't have to be a living thing. But because rock doesn't have what it takes to talk, a rock cannot talk. The Brahman inside the rock cannot make talking happen. That is conditioning. And because the soul is a conditioned Atman, it is potentially divine. It is not divine, but it could be. Intrinsically, it is divine, but it got limited by us, if it is our soul. Right? And so that's the first sentence he's saying, that it's potentially divine. Secondly, therefore, he says, what is the purpose? The purpose is to show our full divinity. Right? The entire goodness that we have in us. How can we demonstrate that? This becomes again a matter of personal responsibility. So it's full of the fact that we have to persevere. Right? And by controlling what? Controlling external and internal nature. Now, my interpretation is probably slightly different than other people, but by external nature, I mean being able to control external nature, literally. And that is the purpose of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, right? Control of external nature, which is a God-like ability in a way, and the control of internal nature. So basically, he is saying that the focus is on those two things: control of external and internal nature. And he says, go do this by whichever marga, whichever approach is available to you, four of them being listed as Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raj Yoga, Jnana Yoga. Right? So to me, it seems that he's taken this Brahman, Atman, Tat Tvam Asi ideas and put them in a very powerful, practical paragraph that is telling us what our mission in life is. So I summarize this by saying that we have, following what Vivekananda has written, that we have two, purposes in life. One purpose. See, oftentimes when people are asked, what's the main thing you want to achieve in life? What is the answer? The answer that is very often given is happiness. Everybody wants to be happy, and there is no question about that. There is no reason why that should not be the the purpose in life that you want to achieve. But I also feel when Vivekananda talks about external, controlling external nature, and also I also feel that there is a second purpose in life, which is to lead a purposeful life. There isn't just only one purpose in life, to be happy, right? That would mean that, a rich playboy is doing wonderfully well. That is not the only purpose in life. And why is there a second purpose in life? Because we know that we owe so much to society. We wouldn't have been around had it not been for a number of other people, including your parents to begin with. So we owe a certain debt to society. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to win Nobel Prizes. Do what you can. Maybe somebody is a great singer and brings happiness to people. Whatever it is, one has to do something beyond oneself. Right? So if you start with this, so to me it seems that this Vivekananda paragraph, and even otherwise, we have two purposes in life. One is to try to leave a better universe behind you to the extent that you can. And the second definitely is to lead a happy life. Two purposes, right? Usually when you have a single purpose, things can go wrong. For example, if we want to develop a stent, and let's say that you tell the engineers, we want to develop a stent so that the artery does not collapse. If you give them that one objective, the engineer might come back with a steel plug. The artery will definitely not collapse, but the patient will. So you need another objective that says we want to maintain the blood flow through that artery. So typically you need more than one objectives to box the problem in, so to speak, so people don't do some wrong things along the way, right? So if we have these two objectives, then Vivekananda goes ahead and says that there are four paths, right? Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, of achieving these objectives. And among these, my argument would be that there is only one that really forces you to achieve both objectives, and that is Karma Yoga. Because Karma Yoga says you have to do karma first. You have to do something. You can't just sit in front of God and do bhakti. Or you can't go to Himalayas and spend the rest of the life there with no other contacts. These are all paths to achieve happiness, possibly, but not necessarily to achieve or doing good things for society. So I would have thought that Karma Yoga is probably the best if there are these two objectives. I'll just summarize. Brahman is that which makes existence, awareness, and bliss possible. Brahman is infinite in space, time, and objects. Brahman is everywhere in this universe and beyond. It is the ultimate reality. Atman is that Brahman within you. For practical purposes, they are the same. Tat Tvam Asi. God is in you. This is the central idea of Hinduism. If one has to pick one thing about Hinduism, I would pick this idea of Tat Tvam Asi. Central idea of Hinduism, which distinguishes it from every other religion. Whether you consider religions born in India or you consider Abrahamic religions, Hinduism is the only religion that has this notion of Tat Tvam Asi. Any comments, questions?
Well, Anand, was an exhaustive discussion for almost 70 minutes. Very thoughtful scientific presentation. So I don't think we have enough time to make enough comments on all the scientific exposition you did. Couple of things I want to say about it is what Vivekananda was teaching is exactly what Ramakrishna summarized all his life through him. But it's interesting to see what one of the Ramakrishna Mission scholar mentioned, talking about Ramakrishna's teachings. The question related to Dvaita, Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita. He said, it doesn't matter what you do. Make certain that you realize God, whatever means you make. So I think to me, that is the correct way of looking at it, what Ramakrishna says, and that's what Vivekananda was basically trying to teach us. He also talked about Advaita, Dvaita, and Vishishta Advaita. And it is a very challenging subject, as you know, we've been discussing for the last 40 years together, starting with Minneapolis. But the way I look at it is in Advaita, God and living beings are eternally one. And which basically started in Karnataka, not in Kerala, by Shankaracharya in 8th century, and spread all over the country, and one something I prescribed too. Of course, it wasn't 400 years Ramanujacharya started in Tamil Nadu, what we call the Vishishtadvaita. Basically, what she said was Atman is different, but eternally connected to Brahman. So this is qualified non-dualism. And a simple example I like to use is a big ball of fire and the spark that flows, spulling that comes out of it is the individual. And of course, Dvaita, as you rightly described, talking about independent entities altogether. Last comment I want to make is, which I shared with you yesterday, he's talking about Atma. I'll just walk through one more time for people to see where I'm coming from, and then tell you about your comments about coming to Minneapolis this summer. All living beings are Atma. Atma is the sense, the core, the very truth, and the very being of all living beings. Let me go slowly now. It is not that everything has an Atma in the sense of possessing it. It is not that everything has an Atma in the sense of possessing or owning it. That the Atma is everything. And the same spirit is, I don't say it is not that I have a self. Rather, I say I am the self. So I am Atma. So one should not separate Atma from the things. All things that exist simply a manifestation of Atma. Everything is one, and many things see are manifestation of that single one entity, both livings and non-living. And the last comment I was talking about is because of that, you're not going to leave your space that you're talking about in Dallas. You are Atma. You are Atma in the names what we call as Anand. And that Atma is going to fly, because you're not going to drive, by air to come to Minneapolis. So I don't think you're going to leave your Atma space back in Dallas. I'm sorry. But you are Atma. You don't own it. You don't have Atma inside you. You are Atma. Your self is a manifestation of Atma. So when you travel, that's what it comes. Because I can go for a long time. You went for 70 minutes. So I don't want to go anymore. I just want to make a couple of comments on this. I want to see what Johnny has to say and how you respond to it.
Well, let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
What to me, what you have said is absolutely correct, but it only applies to Advaita Vedanta. It is Advaita Vedanta that says that everything is Brahman and that we are a misinterpretation of Brahman. And therefore, this body that I have is not something different from Brahman. And therefore, when, your definition of Atman, as you defined it, is appropriate for Advaita Vedanta. But I don't believe that that is appropriate for Dvaita Vedanta, where the Dvaita by itself means it is different too. So it is saying that this body is matter, Brahman is consciousness. Those two things are two different things. And in that context, to say that there is Atman inside you, I think is English-wise correct. That, like you are a pot and there is space inside you. And in either case, if I come to Minneapolis, I am not taking that same portion of Brahman that I occupied in Dallas. So it's a different portion. It's like space. The obvious example is space. You take a bucket full of space from here, space is not moving with that bucket to Minneapolis. The bucket is moving in space. It's exactly identical to that in terms of, I mean, there is no way that Atman can move. Brahman cannot move. We proved that last time around. Another way of saying it is Brahman has no need to move because it occupies all spots already. So if Brahman cannot move, obviously Atman cannot move, right? That is why they say that Brahman is lame and Prakriti is blind. And the combination is what works to produce this universe. This, by the way, is exactly opposite of the way Einstein put it. But it's the same kind of an idea.
I've heard somewhere also an analogy, and you made the analogy of your laptop and being a object and a subject kind of thing. I like the analogy of Brahman being the screen that we are looking at this laptop.
Yes.
And all this pixel of I see
Yes.
Dr. Sane, I see Professor Palka, Paragji, you, right? So we are not realizing that we are part of the screen. Basically, we are all part of the screen. Once this satsanga is over, I'll shut it off. It'll be a dark screen, but screen nonetheless. And then, but we're coming as a pixel. I mean, same screen. I can watch a movie later on, whatever. But screen is always there.
Yes.
And that kind of helps me too. So moving the space from Dallas to Minneapolis is basically you're just moving this pixel from Dallas to Minneapolis basically, but screen is the same.
Right.
And it kind of clarifies in my mind that I like
Yes.
that analogy of Brahman and screen. So just wanted to add that. And if Dr. Sani has anything, and you,
No, I think I want Johnny to come, but before Johnny comes, I want to make same comment. This was written about 3,000 years ago in a Sanskrit play called Panchadasi, where basically the light on the stage was being described as eliminating various entities which bring them to life. So the dancers on the stage were making those various motions only because of that light. So your pixel you're talking about is exactly what Panchadashi described 3,000 years ago. So I understand what you're saying. I agree. Thank you.
There is, by the way, just a quick thing, a very nice little segment by Sarvapriyanand. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you will see that same analogy that you were speaking of, the screen and so on. He puts it very beautifully. Just the way you have put it, except he elaborates it some more and so on. So there is that.
Yeah, what I wanted to contribute is a couple of what I see as very important parallels between what you've presented today and what you might describe as thoughtful Christianity, not Christianity based on dogma, but kind of the implications behind the Christian story. And the 2 points are this. Quakerism is a historical outcome of Christianity. It doesn't, if you talk with Quakers today, you won't hear very much about Jesus and that sort of thing. It's highly personal, but you won't hear it much in general. But Quakerism has one fundamental principle, and that principle is there is that of God in every person. In every person, right? So it to me that's very close to the concept of Atman.
Yes.
Okay, that's point one. The other point came up for me just this past week. I was part of a discussion group. I go to a discussion group at the local Lutheran church, and I went to the church service this morning, and on both of these occasions there was an opening prayer. And it was the same prayer, and it starts like this. Now, remember, this is from a sort of using Christian language. Holy God, mighty and immortal, an aspect of Brahman, you are beyond our knowing. So stepping back from any notion that we have good words to describe God, you are beyond our knowing. Yet we see your glory in the face of Jesus Christ. So the incarnation of the divine reveals the basic nature of the divine. And then comes this petition, transform us into the likeness of your Son, into the incarnation of the divine, who renewed our humanity so that we may share in his divinity. This is like awakening us to the presence of Atman, is the way I read this. Well, this is a church just down the street here, right? And it's not part of a deep philosophical discussion. It's a prayer that opens a church service. So I think there's a lot to be said for being open to the parallels that there are. And of course, Vivekananda was very strong about that. And he said very explicitly, you can follow any spiritual path, any religion. It's not they're different in many respects, but they also share the most fundamental aspects.
Yeah, it would be nice to have, some sort of a discussion of these different concepts in different religions, some comparative study.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, there's a huge literature on that,
Yes.
which I have not really dipped
Yeah.
into. I just have been struck by the parallels whenever I encounter them. And in a way, the reciprocal is that in these discussions at the church, I very often bring up something that I've learned through Hinduism, and it is always accepted. I have never, ever, ever made any statement that derives from Hinduism that raised any objections.
Yeah.
Just one comment. What I am thinking, and help me if I am making wrong statement, but what happens is because we are so much accustomed to objectify everything
Yes.
in order to gain knowledge, therefore there is a tendency unconsciously we slide into the object way of trying to understand all these concepts of Dvaita, Advaita, and all that. And that is, I think, is the fundamental reason why Advaita and Advaita created. In my mind, Dvaita is somewhat object-subject type of idea, whereas Advaita is strictly subject type of idea. But it is very difficult to understand that subject part of it. And I think that is where the bigger stumbling block, if you may say, is. That is my opinion. Thank you.
I mean, I just, I kind of agree with you that I'm not sure how else to understand it.
Right.
Okay. So that's why I said, early on that maybe that's the reason for the neti approach. But that doesn't, except for saying that everything we know is not Brahman. It's a funny thing that you start with that and you end up with dualism, right? So this
Right.
laptop is not Brahman, you are not Brahman, the tree is not Brahman, nothing is Brahman. So now you end up in a situation where Brahman and the world are two things. So then you have to backtrack from that and try to get back into Advaita.
Right.
So it's a topic I think that is very difficult to explain.
Right.
And one tries to do the best one can in terms of the way we understand things.
As long as we understand, that really matters, really.
Right.
I
But
think
but one comment I will make is that eventually, when you reach the so-called enlightenment, then all this will go away. All this confusion, all this misunderstanding, and everything will go away. That is what Raman Maharshi and Vivekanand and everybody is saying. That I think that is what it is. And unfortunately, we are not there yet.
And the unfortunate part is that everybody says that, but it's very hard to find anybody that has actually done it.
Well, yeah,
So
true. In current time, yes.
yes.